Well, this is the next part of our ongoing, I think it's part 5, ongoing making of the RD seat. The seat cowl, it's actually a seat cowl, not a seat. But what we've done over the course of the last week or two is shoot some pictures to share this with our friends. The next part of this is going to be what I call the final fits, and there's always a final fit on this. Now, the reason the fit would take longer than necessary is because I want this stripe in the final part to be parallel to this stripe. I don't want it to go up on an angle or down on an angle if possible. So once the part is, and we have the white, which will be the white for the stripe, we always paint the stripe first. It's the easiest way to do this, and I did a rough fit on here. Now this seat is shimmed in 4 or 5 different positions here. I can move the seat side to side, forward and back. I've made a way of doing that. Of course, number one, the original seat was rubbing the paint off the tank, so I just slid it back just a little bit. So I do have some adjustment here, but the main thing is I want to have in the final part, and you can see I put a piece of green tape down here to get a rough idea where that stripe is going to wind up. Now, I don't want to have it, I'd like to have it, if possible, parallel to the bottom line. So again, that presents another little bit of an issue, and I know I'm going to have to make, I'm going to have to get another taillight, make a taillight fender. I'm going to ultimately recover the seat with some new vinyl. But now, after moving this around, and I made a real nice way of adjusting this. Right now I have shims under here, so I can shim the final part. And when I make the brackets, I'm going to allow that I can shim the back up or down a very small amount, but I'd really like to start with that stripe being parallel if possible. So by laying out that tape and then taking all the measurements, that'll allow me to lay that paint out. Now it's the same thing with the top. I want this top stripe and this sawtooth pattern to be in here in the final part. So by laying out the green tape and measuring out, and I've taken the measurements of the sawtooth so that they're very similar, and of course so that they match the same sawtooth that's on here and the same sawtooth that's on there. Now once I come back to the shop, now I can just take all these measurements, and I'm basically working off the bottom of the seat being parallel to the stripe. And it would seem, after doing this 3 or 4 times and going back and forth and looking at different ways, different thoughts I had in my mind, how I wanted to do this. And of course the first step is to make a block, make a pattern of the block. And the block is not square. It's longer than it is high, so I want to have a pattern. I did the height and the length with paper folds, so that ensures that it's all 90 degrees. Making sure, of course, that I have an accurate representation of what that is. I made a little sketch here just to show the amount that the sawtooth pattern was off. Now this sawtooth pattern, by the way, looks like a real easy thing to lay out in tape until you go to do it. And if you want it to be symmetrical and be equal on both sides and have the angles equal, it takes a little longer than you think it would. But the problem, you know, as everything, the problem as always is we want to have everything. We want our cake, we want to eat it too, and not get sick. So as I'm shooting pictures of this is looking like it's going to lay out pretty nice. And I had a very small issue here that I'm glad I found ahead of time. I laid out the whole part originally the way I thought, working off the measurements I had, and I thought, well, this is just going to be just about as perfect as it gets. I laid the blocks out, and of course putting a piece of masking tape in there, and this all goes, it's relatively predictable, nothing secret, nothing trick here. Doing a Yamaha, what some people call the Yamaha ladders. We've done enough of them. We've done we've done 3 bikes for Luciano to have ladders, and 2 for us. So we've done a few of these ladders. But anyway, getting these all laid out, relatively straightforward for anybody that doesn't do this kind of work all the time. That establishes our height. And by the way, you'd always want it to end with a full block. It doesn't matter where it starts, but I want it to end in that corner. I want to start a full block so that the last block is the full length and then has an angle. Now after I laid this all out, this is pretty funny, I laid it all out and I was getting, I guess I didn't have my coffee early enough in the morning here or whatever. Took it out to the garage and I didn't like the way it looked. It was too high. Now the reason is, it's hard to describe this. It's mechanically accurate, but it looks wrong because this part has a curve in it. The way the seat sits here, it just didn't look right to me. So what I want to do is lower the whole thing. And now you get into that thing of, it can be right, but look wrong. So you have to make it a little bit wrong to look right. So I lowered it a ½ inch just to see if I'd like that. Pull off all the tape. Redo, go back to square one, which this is only about 10-15 minutes to lay out the tape. And we have plenty of tape in inventory, that's for sure. And this is all BRODAK dope, by the way. There's no part of this finish except the urethane cleared. It's not BRODAK dope, which makes for some very nice tape lines. The urethane doesn't make as nice tape lines, I've found, as BRODAK dope. So I try to use the BRODAK dope for the color whenever I can. So now the stripe is a ½ inch lower. It's mechanically less correct, and I made a little pattern so I could get both sides the same. And I realized maybe I'm making myself crazy here for nothing, but I do want it to be parallel. But I know that in the final thing I'm going to have a way of shimming the seat up in the back or in the front or both, because in the final analysis when that seat is recovered it may change this a little bit too, depending on how I make the brackets. And of course I haven't laid any of that out yet. And now here's for making the zigzags, and this is sawtooth zigzags, swordfish, whatever you call. This is a good way of getting at the 2 points originate at the same spot. And of course once you get the first one accurate, the rest of them all start to fall into position. But if that first one isn't accurate, you spend a lot of time and a lot of tape for nothing. So here I have my pattern. I wanted them to end on a parallel, begin on a parallel. Now I can lay out the rest of the tape, and the rest of it is just razor blades and tape. Little by little by little by little, it all starts to come together. But now the back masking, of course, with tin foil. And I do the impression, take an impression of where the tape is. What this does, it minimizes the amount of tape that touches the white paint. Save actually some work, and there's a lot less chance that's going to bleed than if you just run bands of tape around. Now in the stripe it's different, it doesn't matter. When we backmask the stripe it won't matter at all. But we learned this trick from the late Walt Prey years ago, and it's worked to perfection in modeling and in motorcycling. Allowed us to make some really, really nice motorcycle parts. Some nice model planes, of course. And other things. Now, here I got the black sprayed. Now, what I did in the course of doing this is why this took a couple extra, there was a gap between this video and the ones before it. What happened is I was letting each one of these coats of paint dry overnight, because the way the days played out, it was between babysitting and everything else, and we don't let this dry in the shop, of course. So of course another trick, very good trick always, is heat the tape with a when you're pulling tape or backmasking, heat it with a heat gun. A hair dryer is even better. Now I leave the last band of tape on, which is going to stay a white stripe, and I just have to now backmask over the ladders and over the stripe. Relatively simple to backmask this backwards. And then spray the yellow, which this all goes from this point on. It's really just waiting for paint to dry now. because this was a day that the baby wasn't with us. We let this dry up by a heat vent. But again, we're always working around something, and that's what makes it challenging, makes it interesting. We don't run into Groundhog Days. Every day is different here. And again, getting off the rest of the tape with our hair dryer, just getting as much of this off as we can. And it's best to pull it straight back, warm it to the touch, pull it straight back. At the end of getting all of the tape off, it's best to, in my case, just card the edges very slightly. And here you see pulling up the tape. But it's a giant difference, and that was a trick John Brodak shared with us years ago, the heating of the tape with a hairdryer. Without that, every once in a while you just pull up a big glob of paint, a big glob of white paint or whatever, especially if you're doing a color a day like I am. Now, ordinary credit card or any kind of card, really, just shave the edges. This is about as simple as it gets. It knocks down the edge real nice, gets it prepped up, ready for the clear. And this is one of the things that, a nice little trick, because once we get the clear on there, we're going to be wet sanding it several times. And as I looked at it, I said, well, I really like the way it came out. Now, of course, the real trick is when it gets fit onto the bike with the bracketing, and then see that all of these lines line up. It looks like this is a relatively simple, straightforward thing, but the alignment of this part on the motorcycle is going to be a big issue, and I want it to be perfect. So I'm not going to rush it, and that'll be our next part. That'll be part 6.